So for those of you who are only going to watch 10 seconds of this video, and I know there are a lot of you, and this is the one thing you're going to want to look at before anything else. Now, these are your gas ports, and what you're seeing in there is just steel burr improperly drilled out of the ports themselves. That is not plastic, that's not part of the hole that got sheared off in them or anything like that. That is raw steel just choking up the entire system. So if you're having issues, that is the one thing to check out before anything else. So many people were upset about my criticisms with the SAS-12, citing flawless functionality in theirs, and if that's true, it's fantastic. But the simple fact of the matter is, mine was not running well. Today, I would like to go about fixing that. There is one thing that I'd like to amend from my previous video, that having to do with the magazines. They are actually now very available. You can get from Centerfire these 5-round magazines for 25 bucks a pop. So that is no longer a criticism, and actually a strong suit in its favor. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and fix this thing up and see if we can't get it running reliably. Oh, and also, I know a lot of people will say, yeah, well, you weren't using the right ammunition. You have to use high brass shells or extremely high velocity shells or whatnot. That's fine. I mean, if you put some really hot stuff in there, yeah, it'll work. But in my personal opinion, if you have to use premium ammunition in a shotgun that costs 140 bucks, something's gone horribly wrong there. You should be able to use cheap ammo in your cheap shotgun, and that's the way I see it. So my goal here is to get this thing cycling, functioning properly with the cheaper ammunition, be that either the 2 3/4 inch birdshot or maybe the cheaper buckshot, things of that nature. So the first step in doing that is disassembling this thing and taking a look at how it works. Obviously, first thing, unload it, or don't, you know, your call. But I want to unscrew this fore-end cap here. It comes off nicely, just threads off. You will notice that this does have the ball bearing spring detent that helps it to stay in place, kind of interfacing on those holes in the fore end. And with that off, this should pull straight off. Fore end pops straight out, and there's one thing you are going to want to pay attention to. Not sure how well you can see it, but there are these little holes here in the end of the fore end that interface on these pins on the receiver. They fit inside it, keep everything snug in place, but I bring that up because the ones on the fore end, the outer walls on them are very, very thin. They break rather easily. You can fix that up with some JB weld or something of that nature, but just bear that in mind. If you take this thing apart too much or too aggressively, you can damage that. So as you just saw, the barrel will pull straight out. You have your gas piston here, just a very, very large gas plug that sits over top of the guide rod here. So that pulls out. Alright, so then next to come off is going to be the op rod here, the recoil spring, the bolt, and bolt carrier itself. Now this is all just being held in the receiver by this bolt handle, so as soon as you pull that out, it will go shooting forward. So go ahead and take the spring tension off of that. Just kind of let it ride forward. Make sure it doesn't go anywhere. There we go. So you've got your recoil spring here, which will just come right off. Okay, then you've got your op rod here. Very simple, just set that to the side. And here's your bolt and bolt carrier, or bolt carriage. If you've ever seen a shotgun before, these will look very, very familiar. It's really nothing out of the ordinary. Just interfaces, and the op rod will catch on this side here. Just sitting in there, just like that, which will pull it back and forth as needed. So taking a closer look at the bolt here, again, if you've ever seen any shotguns taken apart before, this should look very, very familiar. But on the inside, you've got a spring-loaded firing pin that will only protrude when the locking block is cleared out of the way. When it's forward, obviously it hits that shelf there and can't go all the way forward. That's fully protruded right there, and can't there. Now that block is only kept in place by the actual firing pin. There's a channel drilled through it, so it's only held there through just that mechanism. Now if you were so inclined, you could take that firing pin out by just driving this pin here out. It goes all the way across, just vertically. Just drive that out, you should be able to yank it out. I'm not going to do that, I have no real reason to, but if you wanted to, that would be how that's done. Now similar, the extractor here, spring-loaded, of course. If you wanted to get that out, once again, there's just a pin right here at the very top that you would have to drive out. Now, the trick with that one is the underside hole for it is much smaller than the pin itself, so you might have a hard time driving it out. You could use perhaps a paper clip or something of that nature. What I've done personally is I just took a nail and threw it on the belt sander for a minute or two until it was narrow enough to get in there. Just press up and there's your pin. Just pops right out. Now I will show you this one because it's not super complicated, but just pull that pin out of there. Set that off to the side. You've got your extractor here. Detent that presses up on it. And the spring for it here. And by the way, if you guys don't have a set of dental picks, they are just super handy. I would advise getting some. So there's your spring. Now the extractor itself is in fairly good condition. The geometry of it is okay. It's enough to get the job done, I would say, to the point where you don't really have to mess with it too much at all. But having said that, if you wanted to go ahead and mix up that geometry a little bit, give it a little bit more of an overhang here. This is just a basic jeweler's file. If you wanted to just kind of give it a little work to kind of give that bit of an overhang to let it grab onto the shells a little bit more, that wouldn't be a bad idea. But like I said, it's not really something that I would say you need to do at all. I'm going to go ahead and hit mine up a little bit with that, because of course, as a reminder, the more rounded that profile is, the easier it is to slip off of the rim, which I was seeing a little bit of in my experience in the footage that I took. Some of the shells were just staying in the chamber, not being pulled out properly. Now, of course, that could be a problem with the extractor, or that could be a problem with just the chamber itself not being slick enough, or the shell quality not being high enough to where they come out. But I figure I address all the issues and it should turn out all right. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more of a jagged overhanging geometry on that. So here's the original before I get started here, and that's about where I'm going to stop. Now, of course, there's not a lot of material removed there, and that's kind of the idea. You don't want to remove much material at all. I just wanted to give it just a little bit of extra bite. And once again, would I recommend doing this? No, not really. If anything at all, just make sure there's no gunk in there, no buildup, nothing that would get in the way of its actual physical ability to catch on the rim of a shotgun shell. So putting that back in place is just the opposite procedure. You want to take your spring, just drop it right into that rear hole there. You want the detent to just sit inside of that spring like so. And then your extractor is going to just sit on top of all that. And just pin itself back in place. Should drop in nicely, and just get it to sit flush. Now you could put, say, a drop of Loctite on there to make sure that that pin doesn't walk itself free, but honestly, it seems fine to me. Alright, so breaking things down further, the guide rod here for the receiver just unscrews out. I've got mine torqued down there fairly well, so You can stick something through that hole there to give yourself a little bit of extra leverage. And there it goes. Quite a bit of thread. Alright, so let's go ahead and get the stock off. The butt pad is only secured by 2 Phillips head screws, so let's take them out. And yes, I'm using a drill. Sorry, not really. That'll just pop right off. And you'll notice that since this is a polymer stock, unlike traditional wooden stocks where the butt plate is just screwed in via some self-tapping wood screws, these are actually threaded and protected screw channels. So using a drill isn't really going to hurt it that much. So with the butt pad off, taking a look on the inside here, see that it's just a flathead threaded end cap with a washer on there keeping everything in place. So let's go ahead and take that out. You will need a long screwdriver for this. And that'll do it. Okay, so there's your just a flat steel washer. Nothing fancy. And this is what keeps that stock in place. It's not a bolt, no, it's just an end cap. So that's a little atypical, but not unheard of. So then you've just got this tube that the stock mounts onto, and once again, it's just threaded on there. Mine's a little stiff still as well, so once again, just gonna drop a punch through there to get a little extra leverage on it. Get it started. And it just threads straight out once again. Alright, so there you are. Okay, so that only leaves just the receiver and the trigger group here. Now, one thing to note, everything in the stock, that has absolutely nothing to do with the action or the recoil system or anything like that. So if you took it off completely, it would still work exactly the same. It's only there just for the stock, and that's it. So if you wanted to master key this, it would be a viable candidate. So as far as getting the trigger group out, all you have to do is punch out this pin right here. Set this up on something so I have some clearance. Screwdriver will work. Just drive that pin out. Don't lose it. Now there's a small rail section here that keeps the trigger group from moving back here, so you want to slide it forward and then out, just like that. So that barrel I was talking about just sits inside there. So there's your bare receiver, completely stripped, just a hunk of metal. And here is your trigger group. It's really nothing fancy, just a crossbolt safety that stops the trigger from being pulled. Your mainspring is in this channel here down the middle, and that spring imparts pressure on these two arms here, which are connected back in here, which work on a pivot, just like that. So you can see that a little bit better. So once again, those arms connect to the hammer here, which pivots on this pin, and that just pushes that forward. That's what imparts the majority of the force. And you have a disconnector right here, this little guy right here. Notice there's your disconnect. And then your actual sear is on the opposite side. The whole thing is very reminiscent of an AK in the fire control group. And you've got the disconnector back here and then the actual sear up front. So there's really nothing fancy or complicated about this. If you were so inclined to take it all apart, you've got pins here, here, and here that you could pop out. but I'm not going to do that. I don't see a reason to do that. Oh, and of course you could pop this pin out here if you wanted to take out the magazine catch for some reason. Maybe you want to put a bigger one or a larger, wider one in there. But otherwise, I don't see really a reason to mess with this at all. The trick pull is actually already pretty great. So you see no reason to futz around with that. But there you go, there's all your components. So that's everything completely torn apart. Now, of course, the first thing that you're going to want to do is to clean this up really, really well, as best as you can. You know, clear all the cosmoline and oil and filth out of there as well as possible. But once you've done that, we can move on to the more fun stuff. Now, you're going to want to polish up all the contact surfaces to get the action as smooth as possible. But I'm going to forego that right now, apart from one small section. Now, you've got the hammer right here, which the bolt carriage rides over top of rearward, like so. And it has to press that down to get over it rearward, as well as recock the hammer, of course. So you've got contact surfaces all through there, which you can see in the form of the finish being worn off. So I'm going to give that a good polish. This is similar to an AK if you've ever worked on them before. Just polish that up. Don't remove any metal, of course. Don't remove any material, because if you do so, you run the risk of removing enough material to where it's not going to be able to press low enough to actually engage the disconnector or the sear itself, and that's a bad time. But just give it a good polish, get rid of all the friction there as much as you can anyway, and that should be good to go. So we're going to go ahead and do that. You can polish surfaces a number of different ways, such as using a very, very fine sandpaper, or perhaps some steel wool, or just hand lapping it, things of that nature. But I'm a very, very lazy man, so let me show you how I do it. So I'm going to bust out the Dremel, and I know, before you say it, this is using a felt tip, so it's not going to damage anything. So we've got the Dremel, and we're going to use a little bit of Mother's Shine polish. Just going to load that up with a little bit. Spin off the excess. And just go to town on it. Now, of course, when using a Dremel, most people get a little sloppy with it. You want as many points of contact as you can. So I'm left-handed. I like to hold it in my left hand and brace it up against my side here and just kind of work back and forth. It will get messy, fair warning. Just a little bit more on there. And that should do it. Take a look. It's much shinier, much less friction. Yeah, my finger's just gliding right across there. I'm gonna clean this up, get rid of the rest of the gunk on there now. This is a very common technique with, say, your Sega 12s. Back in the day, they often didn't have quite enough gusto to make the full cycle of the action. So we had to get creative, polishing the surfaces and whatnot, to allow it enough force to cycle fully. So this is a bit of a hallmark callback to that sort of thing. There we go, nice and smooth. I'm going to do the same thing with just the very outer rim of the gas piston here, because this piston plug, it tends to get caught in there a little bit, just kind of give it a little bit of resistance. So I'm going to polish that up, not the whole thing, of course, just the very outer rim, and see if that'll smooth things up. So that's a little bit better. Enough to matter? Probably not, but it is something, and every little bit helps. Not bad, not too bad. Okay, let's go ahead and get this whole thing reassembled, and I can show you the next step as far as polishing the action goes. It's just the opposite of what I showed you earlier, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. Alright, so here's what I went ahead and did. Reassembled, at least for the most part. Fill the action up with good old valve grinding compound. I know, this is cheating, but we're just going to go ahead and work this action a couple hundred times. Oh, you can just hear the grit in that, isn't it great? Do that a couple hundred times, it'll really, really smooth out the action. See you in a bit. Alrighty, so that's done. We're gonna go ahead and take this thing out to the kitchen sink, or maybe in the bathtub if it won't fit there. Rinse all that crap out of there, get all that out. We're gonna swap it to a more medium grit. The valve grinding compound is very, very, very coarse. So next we're gonna swap it to just some basic toothpaste. Typically you wanna be using the white, just paste toothpaste, but unfortunately this is all I had on hand is the gel stuff. We can make it work, but it's not ideal. So I'm just gonna really plaster that in there. I'm having way too much fun with this, in case you couldn't tell. Now, in case you couldn't tell, what we're doing is basically using abrasive pastes of different grainages, different coarsenesses. Is that a word, coarsenesses? To essentially work into all the little nooks and crannies to the point where every part where a metal piece is touching another metal piece, that's going to seep in there and it's going to grind back and forth between it. The open spaces, it's not going to actually do any grinding or any polishing or any surface abrasion at all. It's just the points that are touching each other is what gets abrased. So basically this is a really quick and dirty way to polish up any points that are causing friction. So once again, here we go. Give it a few hundred goes and we'll see you in a bit. So now with those two out of the way, flushed out and ready to go, we just have one left, the very, very fine paste, that being Mother's Shine. So let's give it a go. God, this white stuff is shooting everywhere. So once all that's said and done, one thing you absolutely will want to check if you're going this route is to make sure that your firing pin is moving, is free floating. If that is stuck forward, it's got enough grit in there to keep it there without moving back or moving at all, that's a bad time. That's a recipe for a slam fire, and you don't want those, especially in a semi-automatic. So that aside, let's go ahead and clean everything up, get it lubed up, and get it back together. So the big question is, did all of that do anything whatsoever? Well, let's find out. I know you guys can't feel this, but it just feels so much better. Hopefully you can hear it, just how less grit and grain there is in there, giving it some resistance. I wouldn't call it buttery smooth just yet, but it is pretty damn smooth. A lot less resistance. I like it. So we've got a few other things to do. Let's move on to those. Something that I had mentioned earlier that was giving me problems was the shells not extracting out of the chamber. Now, I mentioned that could have been because of the extractor itself, could have been because of the chamber. Now, this chamber, it feels pretty smooth to me, but I'm going to go ahead and polish it up anyway. So I've got two of these flex hone brushes here for 12 gauges. This is the coarse, this is the light. We're going to start with the coarse, of course, and just going to spritz this up with a little bit of CLP just to keep it lubricated. And we're just going to get started. So we're gonna go ahead and just clear all the crap out of there. Going to swap to the finer brush. Again, a little bit of CLP going in there. Just help things along. And we're gonna work this out. So it may not be showing up super duper well, but that chamber has been thoroughly polished and should be much easier on the shells coming out. So the only thing left to do from here is to attend to the gas ports. So the gas ports on this are a little interesting. There is a hole drilled right in here in the underside of the piston assembly, and that hole goes straight in at an angle about a diagonal like that. And if you can see, let me grab my light here once more. So if you can see, there drilled on both sides are two holes that lead straight into the barrel. They are actually fairly large in size, especially for a 12 gauge piston assembly. So let's take a closer look at those. So if you remember from the start of the video, this is a closer look at the gas ports, and once again they are clogged up with just metal burrs, just choking the whole thing up. So let's attend to that. Alright, so the way that we go about fixing that is taking this 5 30-second drill bit. Unfortunately, the regular sized ones are just a little bit too short to reach all the way through the gas ports, so we've got to use this comically oversized one. Just take one of these, guide it through and into one of those gas ports at a time, and there's enough sway to be able to get it into either one. And work it around, in and out. Make sure you don't go too far into it, otherwise you'll hit the other side of the barrel, and that's a bad time. So just kind of work that in. So that completes everything that we were going to do this guy. I can't think of anything else to improve apart from one other thing, and that is something of last resort, and that is opening up the gas ports further than they were designed. Now I will do that if everything I've done so far doesn't help, doesn't get it to where I need it to be, but we got to test it out for that. So let's take it out of the range and see how it does. All right, so here we are back out again with the SAS-12. Hopefully things go well. I brought a drill just in case it doesn't, but let's see. We're going to start out with some of the Suprema again, see if that does any better this time around. There we go. Okay, doing good so far. Another 5-round mag of it here. Good this time. Not so great. Okay. Okay, little hiccup, but not bad. Hey, I reviewed some of the slow-mo footage on that one, and from everything I could see, it seemed to be a magazine issue more than an action issue. The gun itself seemed to be performing just fine. It's just the magazine was giving a little bit of improper feeding. So I'm going to give it a pass. Let's see how the birdshot does now. And as a reminder, I want to get this stuff running 100%, ideally, because it's a cheap shotgun. It should be able to run cheap ammo. That's my line of thought. See what it does. Well, almost. Let's try another mag, see how it does. This is a 5-rounder. Nice. What I saw there, let's run a couple more 5-rounders with the birdshot, see how it does. Okay, here we go, nothing but birdshot. I think I got 18 rounds total in these 4 mags. Uh-oh. Might just be a mag issue, who knows? Seems like it might have been. Come on. Take a look at the footage, see what's going on with a few of those. But again, a few hiccups here and there. Definitely a lot better than it was doing. I will give it that. So let's take a look at the footage, draw some conclusions. Last 5, just for good measure. So final thoughts on the matter, again. The SAS-12, I think it's a solid gun. The gun itself is okay. I mean, it has a few rough edges from the factory, but you know, if you clean things up, if you polish things up, if you, you know, put some time and effort into it, you can turn it into a decent firearm. But what I absolutely will not give a pass is these magazines. I mean, just the amount of play in here. Just horrendous, and that's what I would assume as much anyway is giving me all these issues that I'm seeing today. That may not be the case. I mean, maybe I missed something, but if you look at that high-speed footage, the bolt is clearly traveling all the way back as it should, you know, in a decent time. It's just the feeding from the magazines is an issue. I mean, that's not something you can easily fix. So would I give this a pass? The gun itself, yes. The magazines, no. But once again, you can get one of these for fun. You know, you clean it up, it's all right, but I wouldn't rely on it for anything serious. You know, you can still get a Maverick 88 or something of that nature for not much more, and I would still suggest doing that. But the SAS-12 for 140 bucks or less these days, perhaps, yeah, give it a shot, I guess. I still can't really recommend it due to the magazines, but it's a fun toy.